Good afternoon,
No biggie.
everyone. Thank you for joining us. And in particular, a warm welcome to Congresswoman Adams, Congresswoman Butterfield, our esteemed panelists, and of course, all of you who are joining us online for this virtual meeting of HBCU leaders to discuss the state of connectivity for these institutions during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. I called for this convening because I recognize that historically Black colleges and universities are unique institutions and they play a powerful role in this country. Some of our greatest leaders, both past and present, are products of HBCUs, including Thurgood Marshall, Toni Morrison, Marian Wright Edelman, Lonnie Johnson, John Wendell Thompson, and of course, as I mentioned, the members of Congress who have joined us here today. As you can see from this notable group of HBCU alumni, to attend an HBCU is not only an opportunity to be challenged academically, but an opportunity to learn how to lead and how to serve our community. And so we must be proactive and create a comprehensive approach to combat existing and potential challenges to broadband access. And at this moment, at this very moment, an opportunity to do what HBUs have historically done for our communities, and that is advocate. According to Pew Research Center, 34% of Black people in America do not have home broadband connection. The disparity is even greater compared to white households when it comes to the ownership of broadband enabled devices. A mere 58% of Black communities, of Black individuals own laptops or desktop computers. And as you have gathered from these numbers, African Americans are more likely to be a smartphone only internet user. And that means that these are millions of Americans that are operating on less than acceptable terms. During my time as a commissioner at the FCC, I have focused on addressing internet inequality. And I use this term intentionally because we can no longer say that this is simply a digital divide. It has hardened. The same people in the same neighborhoods have been left behind over and over again. Too often we think about this strictly as a rural access issue, but the numbers actually show that 3 times more households in urban communities remain unconnected as in rural areas. Research further estimates that 18 million households lack broadband internet simply because it's too expensive. So that means for many in our community, the number one barrier to adoption is affordability. At the beginning of this pandemic, I proposed a connectivity stimulus where I called for the expansion of FCC's Lifeline program, which is the only federal subsidy that gives low-income people access to vital voice and broadband services. Lifeline is severely undersubscribed, though, with only approximately 7 million people enrolled out of 38 million that are eligible. And so I've called for the commission to enter into MOUs with the other federal agencies that administer the services that qualify you for Lifeline in order to increase that subscribership in a program that is an essential part of our social safety net. Additionally, I have called for broadband providers to move to meet the needs of all Americans, especially low income, by offering an affordable, low tier cost service. In times of emergency, no American should go without a connection to the internet because of cost. And while we've seen some internet providers step up to expand discounted or free services to connect post secondary students, more can and should be done. And in particular, for those that have returned to low income and rural households, they face significant barriers. And to support equitable achievement for these students, they must get connected. Too much is at stake. And there's a lot of speculation about whether this virus will come roaring back in the fall. So we must ensure that social distancing does not stop from achieving academic success. And as I'm sure all of my guests here today are going to tell you and will tell you, success for their students is not just the completion of coursework alone. Success is the ability to receive academic advising. It directly affects their retention, graduation rates, and it is also tied to federal funds that institutions receive. Success also means students should be able to use their broadband connections to receive counseling services, and in particular, mental health, if they need it, as this virus has raged Black communities across this nation. So today, I encourage all of us to remember that when we empower HBCUs, we are making an investment in our communities and in the future of our nation. I hope today's conversation is meaningful to our participants, to our viewers online, and as we discuss the connectivity needs of our students, faculty, and staff at HBCUs. And with that, I'm pleased to have David J. Johns join us here today as the moderator for this important discussion. David is the Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. He's the former Executive Director of the White House Initiative of Educational Excellence for African Americans in the Obama administration. And prior to that, he held a number of roles on the Hill. As always, David, thank you so much for your leadership and for your advocacy. The floor is yours.
I thank you for that, Commissioner Starks, and to you, my colleague and friend, Dr. Valentine. Thank you for creating space for us to contribute to this record, a record that many of you have already contributed to both individually and collectively to call for more federal and other investments into HBCUs. As we all know, especially those of you who lead these institutions, but the world needs to constantly be reminded of, HBCUs do a disproportionate share of the work in producing post-secondary opportunities, not only for African Americans, but for first-generation college graduates and for other low-income individuals. And as Commissioner Starks has reminded us all, that while millions of people are looking to remain connected online, our institutions have unique challenges in ensuring that they do the dual jobs of supporting current students as they maintain connections to learning and development, and then recruiting and supporting future cohorts of students so that our institutions continue to not only survive, but to thrive. So it is with that that we want to have a conversation about not just the digital divide, but the racial digital divide. Because there are a number of topics that we can explore today, because there are so many of you who have given up your time, we're going to keep our comments, our remarks focused on that. But again, invite others to contribute to the record beyond the time that we have together in this virtual forum. To ground us in this discussion, I want to turn this over to Congresswoman Adams. Some of you should also know that I am a child of the CBC. I took a pay cut from teaching elementary school in New York to be a CBCF fellow way back when. And so I owe my political and advocacy career to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus and the team at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And so for those who don't know, Congresswoman Adams represents the 12th Congressional District of North Carolina. She's the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus. And for 40 years, Dr. Adams taught at Bennett College. Always want to acknowledge those educators who do God's work. Congresswoman Adams, the floor belongs to you and your beautiful hat.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a pleasure, first of all, to be with you today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. To FCC, to our Commissioner, Jeffrey Starks, thank you for hosting this event. And to my colleague and brother from North Carolina, Representative G.K. Butterfield, who will be addressing you later, I do want to welcome him as well. As a proud two-time graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, as you said, having worked at Bennett College in Greensboro for 40 years, retired now, I know that HBCUs have always been anchors of our community. Our schools educate 300,000 students annually. They produce 42% of all Black engineers, including 47% of Black female engineers. They provide pathways of opportunity for millions of Americans who may be first-generation college students, as I was. And like Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries always says, if you don't know, now you know. Our schools have done more with less. This past December, my bill, the Future Act, was signed into law and finally gave our schools a little more. This was critical legislation which mandated $255 million in annual funding for HBCUs and minority serving institutions to prepare students for careers in STEM professions. And while the legislation was a historic win for our schools and for MSIs, and the COVID-19 has turned our entire world upside down. It's exacerbated a system of inequalities which have persisted throughout our country's history. Colleges and universities nationwide have closed their doors and students have returned home. And though education has continued, it has continued online. So access to high-speed broadband internet is no longer a luxury, it is a necessity. Before this crisis, across the United States, 70% of teachers regularly assigned homework that requires broadband internet access. But we know that only 80% of African American households have reliable access to the internet. Far fewer have access to high-speed internet. In my state of North Carolina, broadband adoption has lagged, and lower income communities and communities of color have become the brunt of that disparity. So, for example, 43% of North Carolinians who could access broadband but did not cite cost as their main reason. So, my state's investing in broadband infrastructure. Not everybody has the means to use it. And so the digital divide is real between the haves and the have-nots. And it's untenable in a world ravaged now by COVID-19. I was proud last week to join Representative Fudge in writing to FCC Chairman and requesting that he inform millions of American families about their eligibility for the Lifeline program, which is a primarily a federal program that helps low-income families afford broadband and telephone services. During this crisis, programs like that are really lifelines. This is a great initiative, but Congress still needs to do more to invest in our schools, to invest in our students, and we have to invest in our communities. So in future CARES legislation, that the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, we've got to do two things. First, we must include a technology fund to allow students to access broadband in a way that facilitates remote learning. And second, we must include at least $10 million in infrastructure funding for HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions, because we know for a fact that students without access to broadband internet have worse educational outcomes than those who have the access. So I was proud to help found the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Partnership Challenge, which has connected private partners with our HBCUs to create a pipeline of diverse talent from our schools into STEM and related fields. But today we're discussing the transition to online learning at HBCUs and how that transition will affect our future. So I want to leave you with a quote that I think you'll appreciate. Societies grow great when old men and old women plant trees under which we know we will never sit. So thank you so very much. And please remember to wear your mask, wash your hands, and remain 6 feet apart. Thank you. God bless.
Appreciate that, Congresswoman Adams. Thank you for your leadership, your service. Also note the policy recommendations around technology fund for access and infrastructure funding as well, and hope that some of the members of the panel will further speak to those. Congressman G.K. Butterfield earned a BA in political science and sociology from North Carolina Central University, located in Durham, North Carolina. During his junior year in CCU, he was drafted into the United States Army and was stationed at Fort Bragg Army Installation in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which helped to facilitate what became his law career. Currently, he is a member of the influential House Energy and Commerce Committee and has been and continues to be a champion for broadband expansion to low-income and rural communities. And fun fact, he's also the father of my dear friend, Felicia Butterfield Jones. Congressman Butterfield Jones, Congressman Butterfield, the floor is yours.
Very much, David, for those very kind words of introduction. I want you to know, David, that the Congressional Black Caucus is very proud of you. We thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And to Commissioner Starks, thank you for convening us today. We are also very proud of the great work that you're doing at the FCC, and I pray that you have many, many more years of success. And to my good friend, Congresswoman Alma Adams, who is nothing less than a phenomenal woman who just stays in constant motion. Alma, it's good to see you today as well. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the very important issue of broadband connectivity for our HBCUs. As was mentioned by David, I am a graduate of an HBCU, North Carolina Central University, actually 2 degrees there. I am also the son of 2 HBCU graduates, and so I know the value of an HBCU education and the obstacles that many of our HBCUs continue to face every day. As Congress makes efforts to understand and address the long-term consequences of COVID-19, it has become clear just how essential broadband connectivity is to the viability of our nation's educational institutions. The coronavirus outbreak has severe implications for our HBCUs. We all on this call know that. Uh, our institutions were already facing the unique challenges that come with delivering high quality education to the nation's most underrepresented and marginalized communities. Despite these challenges, for more than 100 years, HBCUs have been at the forefront of education for African Americans. Unfortunately, many of these schools are plagued with infrastructure issues, including limited access to digital and wireless technology, as well as outdated equipment and facilities. Back in their hometowns, many HBCU students are suffering from the same lack of access to high-speed internet. In today's digital age, these issues have serious consequences for an institution's ability to effectively educate its students. COVID-19 has exacerbated these problems as schools all across the country have shuttered their physical campuses and sent their students home, forcing reliance on online learning platforms to continue their program, to continue educational programming. These circumstances have increased cost and decreased revenue, putting HBCUs, many of which were already vulnerable to closure, in increasingly precarious financial straits. Moreover, many HBCU students are facing financial obstacles to accessing the online resources that schools have made available. More than 70% of these students rely on Pell Grants to finance their education. Over 40% rely on jobs to cover their basic living expenses in addition to tuition. Many of these students will struggle to consistently access the technology necessary to successfully complete their studies. For these reasons, last year I was proud to introduce a piece of legislation that has a long name. I won't read it to you. I'm on the Committee of Jurisdiction for Communications and Technology. My bill would establish an HBCU technology grant program, allowing grantees to better utilize broadband to deliver both efficient administration and practical instruction. I want you to look out for it. It's called the Bridge Act. In addition, our Congressional Rural Broadband Task Force is laser focused on the sole issue of bringing broadband access to our community. We have now drafted language providing for over $80 billion to be included in the next stimulus package, specifically for broadband, to fund the deployment of secure and reliable internet connections for needy communities across the country, creating educational resources and spurring much needed economic development for communities that have been left behind. It takes time to build out broadband infrastructure, and many among us need access, and we need it now. So I've also been advocating to leadership for the expansion of wireless internet subsidies, as well as billions in funds for connected devices and mobile hotspots so that low-income families, students, and the recently unemployed can continue to take advantage of the internet's benefits. In order to effectively address the difficulties that our universities are facing, both during this health crisis and beyond, it will take a coordinated effort by the public, the private, and government. As a senior member of the committee that deals with this, I remain committed to ensuring that our HBCUs have the resources to keep pace with the technological innovation, keeping them both competitive and viable for years to come. This is a very relevant conversation today. I want to thank all of you for participating, and I look forward to further discussion.
Congressman Butterfield, I thank you for those remarks as well as for your advocacy. The same to you, Congresswoman Adams, as well. I want to tap in our esteemed panel, which includes college and university presidents, as well as other dignitaries from HBCUs across the country. Again, I'll ask you as a reminder to Dr. Valentine's comments to keep your response to this initial question to under 3 minutes, and to ensure that we're able to establish a solid foundation that everyone can contribute to. Know that I will virtually cut you off with love if you do not observe that time limit. And so my first question, again, acknowledging all of the comments that have grounded us, and then also thinking about a stat from some Thurgood Marshall College Fund member institutions would say that some of you are experiencing up to 15 or around 15% of students who are simply not able to connect or don't have access. They're not able to access their learning opportunities, let alone any of the other social and emotional resources and supports that your institutions offer. And so my first question is, can you talk to us a little bit about the most significant challenges and successes that your institutions have experienced in responding to COVID. We're specifically interested in access to broadband connectivity, computing and technology and software. How did you or are you addressing these challenges to ensure that your students, that our students, and by extension, our community and country thrive? I want to tap in first, Dr. Adams Gaston, president of Norfolk State University. Dr. J, as she was effectively named by her students, is a scholar practitioner with over 30 years of experience in higher education. Dr. J, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you to both Congresswoman Adams and Congressman Butterfield for their deep understanding of the issues that we're facing. I want to say that at Norfolk State University, I have the privilege of being the president and acknowledging the excellence of the students here. But I also am aware that many of our students have significant challenges as related to technology. During this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the things that we needed to do right away was to really pivot from being an in-class institution to being an online institution. So we went from 258 classes that were online or remote to 1,730 classes that were online or remote within a week. We also had the opportunity, and our faculty were very engaged. We trained over 300 faculty members through our Office of Extended Learning, or shored them up on the online and remote teaching. But the question that we really had to deal with, that we had to grapple with, was how do we have enough effectiveness of our system in terms of our IT system, and how do we ensure that students have the tools that they needed? So we needed to apply a significant amount of dollars into our current IT system to move it up to speed. And we needed to give our students access to laptops. We have over 250 students who needed laptops so that they could continue their work. And then we had the issue of this whole not having broadband at a level that would help them. So we gave them hotspots so that they could have access, because they no longer had Starbucks or libraries to go to. We know that many of our students have smartphones, and that's a start. But you really can't do the work that is required or perform at the level that we expect unless you have the devices as well as the internet connectivity to do just that. So we made sure that as many of our students had that as possible. We also made sure that our faculty were up to speed, and we made sure that we invested in our infrastructure. Now, as you know, when we invested in the infrastructure, that meant we took away from some other things. So one of the things that we think is really important is this whole notion of a trust that will help all of the institutions of higher education, but in particular, HBCUs, because we're often in spots where there are not the kinds of cell towers that exist in other parts of the city. So to invest in those ways that make a significant difference in our students and in their success. Have more time?
I'm looking at Dr. Valentine. We will reserve the balance of your time and yield it to one of your colleagues should they go over. Thank you for that. Next, we will hear from Dr. Brown, second, who is the 18th president of Kentucky State University and is the founder of the Atwood Institute on Race, Education, and the Democratic Ideal. Dr. Brown, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. And again, thanks first to Commissioner Starks at the FCC for pulling this together, and to Congressman Butterfield and Alma Adams, who is always on the front line for HBCUs and equity and access, not just in North Carolina, but across the South. It's good to see all of my colleagues, if only virtually, today. I want to echo what we just heard from Dr. Adams Gaston, and many campuses know, not unlike Norfolk State, Kentucky State was the same, had to stand up in record time the transition of the academic content from the traditional face-to-face format to the virtual format for the online instruction. But there were some unexpected challenges that I just would like to highlight here as it relates particularly to access and bandwidth. First, as Dr. Adams-Gaston suggested, the HBCU model, which is often rooted in the traditional liberal arts education, has a tradition of call and response, critical engagement, classroom discussion, and moving to an asynchronous mode of instruction was a huge challenge. So for those students who particularly needed additional reinforcement, who needed context clues, the option of just clicking into a module, downloading the content, reading it for yourself, and mastering it with understanding was a challenge. So we had a few faculty who were trying to be innovative, who tried to tape their lab experiments, who tried to stand up portals for their public speaking and communications classes. But what we discovered was that the T1 lines on the campus and the existing fiber optic bandwidth on the campus had a tendency to fail, particularly during high content or high traffic areas. And so we had to make sure that faculty were shifting and adjusting the use. Those of you who've been in the Zoom marathon or the WebEx or the Microsoft Teams marathon for the last 40 days or so have experienced the same thing, where sometimes the number of persons trafficking on that platform lead to a crash. And so for campuses with high degrees of deferred maintenance, that was a challenge. Kentucky State was fortunate on last year to use some of the Title III funds that came from Congress to support a laptop initiative for freshmen. And so we had our freshmen coming in last fall with laptops as a part of their tuition and enrollment, but that's only 1/4 of the academic population. And so just like Norfolk State and other of our sister campuses, a number of students did not have the access. The unexpected surprise for me, when we think about a college or university, we think mostly about the faculty, which is really often just 1/5 of the employment base, is that a number of our staff who were forced to telecommute had the same challenge. They could not, persons who are in the secretarial pool, persons who are in the staff pool, did not have access to broadband at home. And for those students who are from Pell eligible households, they ran into the same thing when they went back to the communities that they were trying to escape by accessing higher education. I think as we move forward, there are opportunities that we can discuss, but that was our initial experience in making this COVID-19 transition.
Thank you, President Brown. We appreciate that. Next up is President Frederick, the president of Howard University. In May 2016, fun fact, still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, appointed Dr. Frederick to the Board of Advisors to the White House Initiative on HBCUs. They were the sister initiative to the initiative I had the pleasure of leading, the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. And while I graduated from Columbia University, I'm thankful to have spent a semester doing domestic exchange at Howard University. President Frederick, it's good to see you again. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And I certainly want to echo the comments of my colleagues who both have commented on the support that we've had from Congress in the name of Congresswoman Adams and certainly Congressman Butterfield. I'm actually, because I don't want to be redundant given the things that have been discussed already, so I will take this in a probably slightly different field. And one is on the preparation side. We had entered into a contract with IBM to overhaul our network quite a few years ago after I became president. And one of the reasons for that was we recognized that the digital divide that was occurring throughout our society certainly was impacting our campus as well. had we not done that, we would not have been able to stand up our distance learning as quickly as we did. So that was a critical moment. Prior to my presidency, a area was stood up called Settler, Continuing Excellence in Teaching and Learning. That lab was really done extremely well, and you had to get distance learning certification. I myself taught a course this spring in our School of Education, a course on higher education leadership as we try to fill the pipeline towards HBCU leadership. And I teach a course called the Presidency, and I had to move my course online as well. So all of the challenges that come with that, I certainly saw that. But I think most of our faculty were prepared because we stood that up. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we obviously have a hospital. And that is one of the probably the biggest areas of concern that I have around this. If you look at the number of deaths that's occurring in African American communities at home, that has really skyrocketed. And that's because people are not going to the emergency rooms because of the pandemic. And so what we're going to see after this is a large number of members of our community who were disconnected from the rest of the world and at home dying because they could not get meds or could not get care. So telehealth is an issue I think that's going to be very important for us to look at as a country. And we had to stand that up as well. We've received a grant from Bank of America, and we're setting that up, and we're trying to contact people with chronic illnesses to make an assessment of where they are and also to try to give them as much support as possible, which I think is also going to be critical when we start talking about reopening our country. And I'll close on that. The mayor has appointed me as a co-chair of a subcommittee on equity and vulnerable populations. And the data suggests that we have a huge problem, or will have a huge problem when it comes to contact tracing and testing. So Howard has stood up a testing site in Ward 7, which is in Southeast, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's free. You can call and make an appointment, but when you start adding in contact tracing, especially using GPS, we really are going to need foot soldiers on the ground to assess that. And so while we talk about technology to assist with that, we also need to talk about the fact that we're going to need these workers to be doing other kinds of assessment in the neighborhoods that they go into and bringing that back to our universities as well, so that we can be part of the support system that helps these communities recover from the pandemic. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for that, as well as for your innovation. It shouldn't be lost on any of us that this is another example of the many ways that HBCUs and all of you continue to lead and innovate on behalf of our community. Next up, I want to invite Dr. French, the 5th president of Clark Atlanta University, located in Atlanta, Georgia, to tap in. Dr. French previously served as the president of Miles College. President French, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that introduction. And as my colleagues have done, and that's the thing about when you become number 7, everything's been said. But I would like to thank Congresswoman Adams and Congressman Butterfield, and to our commissioner for bringing together this august group. Commissioner Starks, thank you for bringing my colleagues and I together. And let me just tell you, you have assembled quite an excellent group of my colleagues. These are leaders within higher education that I have great respect for. So thank you for bringing us together. Again, much has been already said, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank Congresswoman Adams and Congressman Butterfield for your advocacy for HBCUs, especially during this critical time. For a minute, President Brown, for a minute, I had to look and see where Congresswoman Adams was representing. It seems like she was representing all of the nation in inviting us to the many things that events that she holds, and inviting us to support her advocacy efforts. So it's holistic in nature. And Congresswoman and Congressman, we thank you for that advocacy. Succinctly, the $14 billion in the CARES Act was critical, crucial. The carve-outs for HBCUs, especially what happened last week with the $575 million that was set aside for HBCUs, was absolutely critical. as we face what will be most likely enrollment challenges in the fall, those are going to be necessary to sustain our operations. Clark Atlanta University is in strong financial health with nearly 4,000 students and an operating budget of about $110 million a year. But that's not enough to sustain a 25 to 35% potential decline in enrollment in the fall. And what we're dealing with, and my colleague, President Frederick at Howard University, whom I love and respect, I'm doing something similar on the mayor's commission here in Atlanta. The problem is when we send mixed signals, unfortunately, from the top about reopening the economies with no evidence of science of precipitous declines in coronavirus. The problem becomes we have 40% of our students who are outside of Georgia. So those parents and those students are looking and determining whether or not it's safe for those students to return to Georgia. So we have to have a unified message. And like President Frederick, I won't go over the things that my colleagues have already expounded upon, but I would say that our emphasis would be on continuing to see additional funds to assist our institutions in technology and to assist us for precipitous declines in enrollment in the fall. Thank you, Commissioner Starks, for this opportunity.
Thank you, President French. Next, we want to hear from President Robinson, the 12th president of Florida A&M University. Dr. Robinson is a distinguished professor and researcher in the School of Environment at FAMU as well. President Robinson, the floor is yours.
Check out his jacket.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David. And I too want to thank Commissioner Starks and our two congresspersons for their commitment to the welfare historically black colleges and universities. I know Representative Adams, I've met you on several occasions, and it's just incredible what you've done. And Representative Butterfield, we've met a couple of times as well. So I just want to thank you first for what you've done. I do want to, I don't want to reiterate everything that's been said. I can say ditto, we have some of the same concerns, but one or two things I do want to point out. So we all made this remarkable transformation, and that's really what it was, from our traditional modes of instruction to where we are now. But we're in a space, we must admit, that others have been, quite ahead of us, right? And so that potential competition or decline in enrollment will be complicated by the fact that there's an expectation that we would have to be very, very good at this to compete in this environment. And that's going to really require an infusion of additional resources to do that. The technology concerns that you talked about, the training with our faculty and our students, the in-home needs of our students as well. I often imagine, what a household is looking like these days, where everybody's at home. You have a college student there trying to get online, a couple of kids in, middle to high school trying to get online, and a parent who's working remotely as well. You can imagine the broadband demands that it has on the household. I think we typically think about what's happening in the households on the basis of an individual student, right? But we really need to rethink this and think about what capacity is needed to facilitate this new order for the foreseeable future for households. We at Florida A&M University are part of a state university system, and all of us in this system have committed to going at least through all of the summer in this remote educational mode. I want to emphasize that although no decision has been made on the fall semester, how we're going to return, we are aggressively looking at mechanisms that might allow some return to some level of operations. And I don't want to say normal, because it won't be anything like what we've experienced before. One of the things I'm proud of, and I want all of us to think about this, is that in our system, in addition to technology needs to facilitate, information transfer, there's going to be also a need to test and trace students, faculty, and staff. So we are working We have an on-site collaboration with the Department of Health, one of the local health centers here, Bund Health Center, and numerous others, where we've been testing individuals in the local south side of town. For the past week or so, we test up to 300 people a day. I think it's going to be a requirement, I believe, that institutions have some means of knowing who has this virus or not on their campuses as they consider what they're going to do into the future. And it's going to take a lot of resources to do that, right? I mean, a lot of resources, and many of us will have to do that in partnership with others. So when we talk about this technology need, there's another need, I believe, that's going to really be important to make us partially whole. And then I'm going to end on this point. I do too appreciate all the work and all the funding that we've received thus far, and that's coming. But when we do our assessments of the impact of funding, revenue loss, monies we had to return for, meal plans and housing and other things that we didn't get in this new mode, those funds will not be sufficient to cover the gap and the loss of revenue. Even if we didn't have a decline in student enrollment, we have a gap. And I do want to emphasize, as much as I appreciate all of the hard work of our friends in DC who've done great work in passing, the CARES Act and so forth, we are looking at significant millions of dollars of deficits here as a result of what we've done already. So I'll stop with that and wait for the next question.
Thank you for that and your leadership, President Robinson. It's good to see you again virtually. Dr. Quentin Ross Jr. is a president of Alabama State University. Prior to becoming president of his alma mater, he had begun his fourth term as an Alabama State Senator after having been elected to his first term in 2002. President Ross, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And again, let me thank Commissioner Starks and Representative Adams and Butterfield for all of the hard work that they're doing for all of our institutions. I'm excited about being a part of this panel with all of my learned colleagues and with all of us facing the challenges that have been set forth by the pandemic. I quickly want to say ditto to everything that my colleagues have said. But here at Alabama State University, when we look at what happens in the technology world, when we talk about Alabama, the 2017 census shows that 25% of the people in Alabama do not have access to broadband. When you break that down to Alabama State University students, about 60% of those students are from Alabama. So of that 60%, about 15% of those students had no access to any type of connectivity at all. So when we talk about pivot, we pivot quickly on this campus to try to rush to provide the online services to our students to finish out our semester. And I just want to say kudos to my faculty, my staff, who within a week and a half time had to make the adjustment. We had Blackboard Ultra here. There had to be intense training for all of our faculty and staff. And like one of my colleagues mentioned, I think Dr. Brown mentioned, we also found that we had faculty and staff who did not have access to broadband. And so it's really telling. The pandemic basically has basically lifted the veil and exposed us in deficiencies that have come in this technological area. And so I want to thank my faculty and staff for all that they've done. But going back to the point that Dr. Robinson has made, when we talk about the technology, but even when we look at where we have to be in the healthcare realm, we are going to be required to do massive testing on our campuses and in our communities. Like Alabama State University is partnering with the local housing authority to provide testing to that particular population, because what you don't know is that individuals in a housing project who have been diagnosed with COVID but have nowhere to go, have children in the home, they cannot quarantine. That is a population that's being missed. And so as our commitment to the community, we want to try to help and deal with that issue. And so we have a testing site partnering with the Alabama Department of Education in order to help in that area. But overall, with the money that we're receiving from Congress, it just doesn't scratch the surface on where these institutions, our institutions, will be because of this pandemic. We were already strapped, but this really took us for a loop And so we're just excited about all the work that's taking place in DC. I appreciate all the dialogue that all of our colleagues are having together in order to move us through. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'll wait until the next question.
Thank you for that, President Ross. I appreciate you lifting up individuals with housing insecurity or a lack of access to quality and affordable public housing. There's been lots of public discussion about individuals who are incarcerated, but not as much with regard to individuals living in public housing. So thank you for that. We will next hear from Tom Jackson, who is the Vice Chancellor for Information and Technology and the Chief Information Officer at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. He leads the development of technology strategy and oversees technology services to support the university's academic, research, and service mission. Appropriate to have you here, Mr. Jackson. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Commissioner Starks and to our representatives for all of your efforts on our behalf. A&T is very proud to have our representatives from North Carolina in Congress, and especially want to thank you again. As many have already said, we had to move very quickly, and I won't go through all the details, but we moved about 1,900 classes online in less than 2 weeks. Fortunately, most of A&T's services run in commercial cloud environments, so we did not have to worry about scaling up services. That happened by virtue of the fact that our services were in those environments. We did have to provide a lot of training, and we conducted over 40 different training sessions for faculty in the month of March to help them move online. We have found that a lot of our faculty are just learning their way to working efficiently online, and a lot of our students are not really satisfied with the experience, and they are demanding more, a better experience, and demanding more from our faculty. So in the interest of time, I will wait for the next question.
Thank you for that. Last but certainly not least, we will hear from, I hope I get this right. If I don't, we'll use this as a learning opportunity to pronounce this all correctly together. Why don't you lead us in it, Doctor, please? How do we pronounce your name correctly?
Sorry, let me unmute myself.
I can hear you.
Okay, hear me. My name is Adebisi Oladepopo.
Oladepopo. Okay, I would have gotten one part of that wrong. Oladepopo, who currently serves as a Vice President for Information Technology at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. He has also worked at several HBCUs, including Morgan State, Norfolk State, and Hampton University. Please, sir, the floor is yours. I'm going to add in another question in the interest of time. And so I'd like you to respond to the first question about how the university is responding. But if you also could answer our second question, where they're going to go in reverse order to wind us back to where we started. So the second question is, what does the current pandemic mean for the future of your HBCU? Specifically, what does your institution need from Congress and the FCC to ensure that your students can not only participate in distance learning, but so that the institution can not just survive this moment, but to thrive? So again, we'll give you a little bit more time to answer both, and then we'll go reverse order. I'll queue up everybody again.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And I bring you greetings from Dr. David Kwabena Wilson, President of Morgan State. He's sorry he couldn't be with us this afternoon. My name is Adebisi Oladepopo. So I'll answer the first question regarding challenges. And I'll do this without having to repeat what everybody has said initially, because we experience the same challenges at Morgan State. So I'll just point out two key items in terms of challenges. We had to actually not just scale up our infrastructure and strengthen the infrastructure as well, but we also have to think about the learning styles of the students. Because too often you provide the hardware, software, but you have to know the population that you serve. We have a lot of visual learners and active learners. So that requires that the faculty have to think about the pedagogy of instruction. So it requires us to train our faculty in a different manner to focus on the essentials. And prior to COVID-19, we've actually been working on infrastructure upgrades. So 3 years ago, President Wilson, when I became part of Morgan State, we did an assessment of our infrastructure. Quite a number of the infrastructure was end of life and end of service. So in 2017, we had a project called NGN, Next Generation Network. It was a $20 million project that allowed us to upgrade the campus infrastructure. We had broadband on campus that was upgraded, and every equipment was really refurbished and then enhanced. So that was a major initiative for Morgan State that actually now prepared us to do what we're doing today. And second of all, we have looked at the issue of going away from traditional laboratories where you have PC labs. We went virtual desktop infrastructure. So that again helped us in transitioning to post-COVID-19, where our students and faculty can actually access software, teaching materials remotely anyways. But one of the challenges was that we had 10% of our faculty that were actually teaching online. And now to go from 10% to 100%, that was a challenge. So it involved us training. And it's not a one-time training regimen. We have it ongoing. So our academic technology services twice a week, send out information to faculty. We have a training hub. And prior to COVID-19, we also upgraded our learning management system. We went from Blackboard to Canvas. Again, all of this actually is like we saw in the crystal ball who was coming down the pike. So that really helped Morgan State to jumpstart going remotely, because now everything is remote. Then in terms of access for our students, because one of our major goals at Morgan State is enhancing student success. And how do you do that? Because if your students don't have access to what they need to connect in COVID environment, then we are up the creek. So we are lucky that in Maryland, the Division of Information Technology, the State Division of Information Technology, work with all of the state universities to provide laptops. So working with that, DOIT and also a foundation, we're able to supply laptops to students and to our staff, because too often we forget that part of the equation. So because staff have to telework. So we set up access to remote systems, and also we're able to train faculty as well in how to use these tools. Now, we also
acknowledging all of that in the interest of time, will you tell us what you need? What does the institution need from the FCC and from our government?
Okay, so definitely, I'll be remiss if I don't say that we need funding and appropriate funding, because this is not going to be a one-time issue in terms of need for broadband access. We need the kind of programs that will go beyond just a one-time funding that can regenerate partnerships with industry, like the Commissioner Stacks actually started doing right now. I believe HBCU need to form a consortium, like what Congressman Butterfield mentioned, that would make this a lifetime project, not just a one-time, because if we do it one time, what happens next year? How to go forward? So we do need to partner with other HBCUs and with Congress to find the right funding to scale up our infrastructure beyond just getting hotspots, because this is going to be an ongoing, this is a new normal for us.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that and for your leadership at Morgan State University. Mr. Jackson, same question to you. What does the institution, North Carolina A&T, need from Congress, from the FCC, and from government more generally?
One of the things that the pandemic has shown is just how large an impact A&T has on the Black community, on the larger community. Many people have turned to us for leadership in this situation. And so there are a few things that we need from Congress. We certainly need continued funding for financial aid and for Title III programs. 86% of our students are on some form of financial assistance. And we have used Title III funding over the last 4 years to upgrade and enhance our infrastructure. We certainly need those to continue. We need expansion of broadband into rural markets. and underserved metropolitan areas as well. Many of our students live in metropolitan areas but have no access to broadband access. And then Commissioner Starks mentioned the FCC Lifeline program, need continued support and funding and expansion of that program to serve low-income households.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jackson, as well as your commitment to North Carolina A&T. President Ross, same question to you. What does the institution need in order to thrive?
We still need more funding to undergird our infrastructure, but I think also to guide us in the Broadband Data Act, giving us the assistance to how we look to that to help us in this type of situation. But I think that's the most important, to continue to provide us the funding to undergird us in the infrastructure, our infrastructure, but then give us the guidance in that Broadband Data Act.
Thank you for that, President Ross, and for your commitment to Alabama State University. President Robinson, what does FAMU and the Rattler Nation need?
Well, it's very similar. As I said earlier, I feel that the expectation and really the need for us to get a lot better at our delivery will be something that we're going to have to work on. And that's going to take investment. You know, we also a land-grant institution, and our reach goes statewide. We have students coming from Miami. We have students coming from smaller counties. And so access from inner cities to rural communities to us is critical for our students and our faculty and staff as well. So I think a program to specifically designed to address these technology needs for HBCUs is going to be required. I mean, you can break it into the various components as needed, but I do think there are some similarities that all of us will have, I believe, within the community, but there are some differences. But I do think you can find those key pillars, develop a funding program around that, to really contribute to making us all whole.
Thank you, President Robinson, and for your leadership of FAMU. President French Jr., what does Clark Atlanta University need from our country in this moment to thrive?
Very quickly, let me first ask that Congressman Butterfield consider where a young lady by the name of Alicia Butterfield Jones received her education, and help us out down here, Mr. Cotton. We need additional funding, just as my colleagues have indicated, in support of the Broadband Act. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Everybody will tell Alicia that she's got a lot of love today. I see what I hear from you, President Frederick. What does Howard University, the nation's capital, need in order to thrive?
Sure. You know, I think the disparities in the outcomes for African Americans in the COVID has unearthed the healthcare disparities that are plaguing our country. Howard is the primary pipeline for healthcare workers in terms of diversity. When you look at medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, nursing, and allied health, the only dental school and pharmacy schools in the district are here at Howard. And Howard University sends more African Americans to medical school than any single institution in the country. And then when you look at our training programs, we train more African American surgeons, especially women, than anyone else. So with that in mind, I do think that there needs to be some investment in the infrastructure around the healthcare workers. And then, as mentioned before, around technology, telehealth is going to play a very, very critical role going forward. And I think in order to ensure the health of the nation as a whole, those most vulnerable among us are going to need assistance to be able to participate in telehealth.
Thank you, President Frederick. President Brown, the second, what does Kentucky State University need in order to thrive?
Yes, I want to again thank you for this session and echo what my colleagues have said, but drill down very specifically, not just the Broadband Data Act. When I was president at Alcorn, there was the USDA Rural Broadband Initiative. And here in Kentucky, we have Kentucky Wired. And so all of the community colleges have broadband access points in their parking lots. And so students were able to go into the parking lots of community colleges, citizens, and use internet access, even though they weren't students. And I would really like to see expanding some discretionary funding or targeted funding through the FCC for an investing in rural broadband initiative with HBCU partners. And so asking the HBCUs to stand up on each campus the broadband for their surrounding communities, just like we did with the USDA Rural Broadband.
Thank you for that, President Brown II. Dr. J, we will end where we began. Dr. Adams-Gaston, what does Norfolk State University need in order to thrive?
Thank you so much, and I want to thank Commissioner Starks for having this time together. I also want to thank my esteemed colleagues for what they've done. Let me say that we do more with less, but it can't be that way forever. We've got to have the resources. Our students deserve the resources to be successful. And in order to do that, we're going to need two things. I think as my colleague down at Florida A&M suggested, Dr. Robinson, we need to close the gap on a lot of the money that we have lost this year. But more importantly, we need to close the gap on access and affordability of internet, high-speed broadband, internet that allows our students to be competitive with their peers. So I thank both the Congresswoman and the Congressman for being so steeped in this. I thank the Commissioner for seeing this as a major issue. And I simply ask that we look for ways to bring that access and affordability to both the homes of our students as well as the institutions. We're going to need a lot of resource. And if we can get some trust stood up specifically to address these needs, we will be more successful.
Yes, to closing the gap, in the spirit of our Maya Angelou, if you all hear me say nothing in the course of our conversation today, hear me when I say thank you on behalf of the students and communities in our country, which you all continue to serve in spite of the challenges that we all face. Chairman Sparks, before I turn this over to Commissioner, before I turn this over to you, just want to highlight some of the themes that I have taken notes on over the course of this discussion. The first and probably the most important recommendation is for funding to cover and to close the gap. Specifically for funds to ensure that the infrastructure, the financial aid, and Title III support provided to our students and our institutions, and the technology needs at HBCUs are met. There's also been a lot of conversation, not surprisingly, around broadband access. And in specific, there's been a recommendation for continued support for the Lifeline program. There's been lots of conversation about the Broadband Data Act, and a specific acknowledgement of the geographical location of many of our nation's HBCUs in rural communities. And so an ask for a specific investment in what would be a partnership between rural communities and HBCU partners. There are a number of other things, including an acknowledgement of the thing that makes HBCU special, the ways that teaching and learning happens on campus, and a lot of our institutions are forced to pivot through that. I want to acknowledge that and lift up that it has been a pleasure of the National Black Justice Coalition to work with many of you who are gathered here today to respond to the needs of Black LGBTQ students and communities. And I also want us to not be remiss in acknowledging that there are lots of social and emotional learning and development needs that our students are experiencing in this moment. And so while we are working to fill cognitive gaps to make sure that our students can compete, we also should be mindful of the mental health needs that are being exacerbated while we're experiencing social isolation, economic insecurities, on top of the health crisis. I also want to highlight, while we're talking a lot about data, something that Dr. Valentin and I spent some time thinking about as members of a Google NextGen community, is the importance of data privacy. There are a lot of us in our community who offer up data to lots of companies that profit from it. And as we continue to think about filling critical needs in the ways that Dr. Frederick talked about, for example, we should also be mindful of protecting the information and data from our communities and families. And so I know that that's a lot, Commissioner Starks. This again is laying the foundation. We will continue to build upon it as we work with those who have been elected and appointed to lead on behalf of our communities and our country. I'll turn this over to you and say thank you again for creating this space, for allowing me to play a small role in facilitating this conversation. And we'll invite you to share your thoughts and next steps as we move forward.
Well, thank you, David. You know, more than anything, thank you all for the conversation. You know, COVID-19 obviously does not see race, but it has amplified inequities from a whole number of vectors, whether it's from public health. We're obviously seeing the disproportionate number of African Americans and Black communities that are having just a devastating number of death tolls and public health issues. And of course, something that I focus a predominance of my time on, and that is the digital divide. And we do know that Black households are significantly less likely to have broadband at home than their white counterparts. And so that does have a feedback loop back into what much of you have been talking about, is how do we make sure that the leadership and the nature and the character of HBCUs is able to continue to produce leaders, despite the fact that we're all digitally learning now. And of course, just over the course of the conversation, I have so much of what we all see and hear and read every day is dispiriting, but my heart has been lifted to see and hear from so many leaders at our HBCUs that are thinking critically of how to see not only students and staff and the schools through these challenging times, but also the larger communities and our nation. And so HBCUs are being called upon to continue to lead, and more will be asked. But going back to the point that I heard a number of times, there was a consistent thread about some of the enrollment challenges. I know I wrote down 25 to 35% potentially enrollment declines. Obviously, this is a time where education is going to be needed more than ever. We're obviously talking about a challenging job economy. Over 30 million folks have been displaced, and making sure that a lot of Black folks are going to also be in homes that have been devastatingly hit, have suffered job losses, and so trying to make that decision about whether to go to school is going to be a challenge. And so we cannot afford ultimately to lose momentum in educating our people. And so this has been a critical part of that conversation. The last thing that I would say here is, in the K through 12 aspect of this, I've consistently heard folks talk about these Title I households and making sure that they are the most likely to come from disconnected homes. In the post-secondary arena here, I have obviously the same concerns about Pell Grant students, and the 90% plus somebody mentioned that are on financial aid, making sure that we know that where students are in some of these low income or financially challenged households, especially now, that they're getting the connectivity that they need in order to achieve academic success is going to be extremely important. We must make sure that vulnerable students are getting connected to distance learning. And I have heard anecdotally stories about folks that are going to these public Wi-Fi spaces, trying to complete their classes that way. There's got to be a better way, and we've got to make sure that we are getting all of our students connected. So thank you so much for the time. For those that have joined us online, thank you for your attention, and thank you for all of this is going to be an ongoing effort and an ongoing iterative dialogue. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Mr. Johns, for leading our conversation here today. And please stay safe and be well, everyone. Thank you.